West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
So the very bad map we see at every presidential election, showing huge swaths of red, I mean, it's flawed and a myth because land doesn't vote, people do. The reality is we are a nation not divided by states, but rather by counties. It's one reason Marjorie Taylor Greene calling for secession isn't just inconceivable as well as foolish. It would be disastrous for Republican voting states. An analysis of the 2020 election by the Brookings Institution showed that Biden's winning base in 500 counties, just 500 counties, encompassed 71% of America's economic activity, while Trump's losing base of 2,500 counties represented just 29% of the economy. And that's because blue states tend to be urban and suburban with large populations, while red counties tend to be smaller, more rural, and sometimes with more cows and corn stalks than people. Economically, it's not even a fair fight. Joining me now are MSNBC political analysts Matthew Dowd and Cornel Belcher. And Matthew, I want to go to you first. This sort of fetish for secession, I remember Sarah Palin's husband was sort of indulging in it. These red state folks keep saying it, but they don't understand the economics of it would really be awful for red states. The states that are the most dependent on the federal government to keep their economies alive are almost all red states: Alaska, Mississippi, Kentucky, West Virginia, Montana, New Mexico, Arizona, Louisiana, Indiana, Alabama. Only New Mexico is a blue state. The least federally dependent states, almost all blue states. Blue states are the donor states: California, Colorado, Massachusetts, you can go on, Illinois, Delaware, New Jersey, etc. Why do they keep indulging in this?
Because they don't care about the economic implications of it. I mean, I think that's fundamental to what they're doing and what they've not done in Washington, D.C. What they care about is the cultural implications of this. That's what they fundamentally care about, because they have a singular culture they want to establish. And since they can't do it as the United States as a whole, they want to do it state by state. The other thing, and I found it peculiar that she used this term divorce in this process. And sometimes, as we know, that in a divorce, sometimes the person falls in love with somebody else or another individual and wants out. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene has fallen in love with another country. That happens to be Russia in the course of this. And she likes what's going on in Russia far more than what she likes going on here in the United States. She likes Putin's brand of leadership far more than she likes Joe Biden's brand of leadership. And so that's what I think this is fun. It's a cultural, this is not an economic concern of theirs. This is a cultural concern of theirs. And it fundamentally doesn't understand what it means to be in the United States of America. United States of America. They have no concept of what this means in history. And to me, the shots at Fort Sumter that started the Civil War, we're long past that here in this country right now, because they've jumped already to the place where they want a separate country so they can establish their cultural monotheistic way they want in America.
But I mean, there are a couple ironies here, Cornel. Number one, they would be ruling a country that would still be substantially black. And since we know anti-woke just means anti-black, what would they do with those poor people who'd be stuck there in their world if you really separated it? And number two, by their own definition, their states are takers. They claim they don't like the federal government and they don't like takers. Their own states are wholly dependent on the federal government for survival. So by their own metrics, they're already the ones who are in the moral wrong.
Well, it's absurd, Joy, and I think what they would have to do is, quite frankly, what they're already doing in many of these red states, and that is making it harder and harder for people of color to vote and to have political power, right? You know, my father and my family is from rural North Carolina, and one thing my father and always talked about was growing up is that you know, in the South, blacks and whites could always get along. It just became a problem when blacks wanted power. And I think that continues to be true right now, is that you would have to see even more draconian measures to sort of disenfranchise and take away black political power, even more so than you do right now. But let's take this out. Let's push this out further. Is that, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene is and many of her friends, you know, with all due respect, they're not even Republicans anymore. They're Confederates.
Yeah.
You know, I went back for the State of the Union. I went back and looked at State of Union speeches by presidents, and even Ronald Reagan talked about the ideal of Republicans and Democrats have to get together to move a legislation that benefits all of America and put aside partisanship. This is not even a party of Ronald Reagan anymore. This is no longer what I could see as a legitimate Republican Party. When you start talking about dividing the country up and breaking the country up, you're a Confederate. You're no longer a Republican.
You know what's interesting, though, you know, Matthew, my poor team has been forced to hear about this all day, but I feel like what's happening is sort of a coddling of the conservative mind. The conservatives don't have the confidence that their ideas can be sold on the basis of presenting them just as ideas. And so they've decided we can't convince people to do what we want and to live by our particular religious dictums. So we're going to tell the federal government, enforce it. I don't like this book, ban it. I don't like drag shows, make them illegal. The things that I personally feel uncomfortable with, I don't feel confident that I can convince people to come to my side. So I need the power of the federal government to ban the things that make me uncomfortable. That to me strikes me as a sort of intellectual collapse and a sense of defeat.
Well, you know, Joy, I'm really glad you brought this point up because I've been thinking about this a lot, all of us have been observers or in politics for decades in this course of this. I can't remember a time when one political party or the leaders of the political party abandoned persuasion. Yeah. Abandon persuasion as a mode of leadership. What they've decided is, just like you said, they can't persuade a majority of America to move in a certain direction, which is where they want to go, which in my view, and I've said this before, is a form of Christian nationalism they want to establish here. So what they do is, since they can't persuade and they no longer want to persuade, they go to force. And every single leader that's emerged, Donald Trump, DeSantis, others, it's not an art of persuasion, it's an art of force. And that's where we are. And when you when you abandon persuasion and you go to force, then democracy is frayed and is broken. And when your major political party no longer believes in persuasion.
You know, they're like missionaries. They're like religious missionaries who use torture as their form of conversion, because they actually don't have enough. They're more like the crusaders. Absolutely. And Cornell, that is the one way to turn even more people away.
Oh, I think this is when she said that, and when the Republican leadership roundly did not come out and condemn it, I thought, my God, and I hate to think this way, but it's also, Joy, a political opportunity. Because look, there's a whole amount of research that I've been involved with that shows Americans are actually really concerned about another civil war in this country, and they don't want another civil war in this country. And the vast majority of Americans still hold on to the hope that even as divided as we are, we have more in common than not, and that we are stronger together. And I like the ideal of Joe Biden going into re-election as standing. And by the way, his speech they gave in Eastern Europe, I thought was brilliant because he talked about democracy and he talked about standing up for democracy. And he talked about taking on the autocrats. And if this Confederate Party that is now emerging on the right is going to be the party of Putin and autocracy and anti-democracy against democracy, they are handing Joe Biden and Republicans an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hate to break it to Marge, but her state would be with the Union. Has she been to Atlanta lately? Y'all state ain't a red state no more, Mama.
She's going to be one of the children. She's going to be one of the children that's divorced, left without a home.
It is Thursday, the 23rd of February of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Well, we are here today, aren't we? We're all here today, in spite of, well, we are part of that severe winter storm, while others are having somewhat of a heat wave. So I hope everybody fared well. We still have a bit more of this winter weather ahead of us. And, so the power hasn't gone out yet. You never know. It often does. So anyway, did you get your latest shipment of expired Trump water? Because I didn't either. I thought it was discontinued. So this guy kept pallets of Trump water expired almost 20 years ago. My God. I know it wasn't 20 years ago, but I like to make it worse than it is because it suits my purpose. Yeah, apparently discontinued in 2010. Well, it's been a while. And a lot of people don't think that water can expire. And if it's in plastic, well, you never know. Organisms could grow if it hasn't been irradiated by sunlight. Actually, that is one way to purify water, is to put it into a plastic container and let the sun hit it for a while. I know you have the polycarbonates, but geez, when you're out in the middle of nowhere and you need some water for survival, it's okay, all right? But apparently the people of East Palestine, or Steen, just love that guy. And Joe's still getting blamed, and Buttigieg is still getting blamed. Oh, they haven't done anything. They're totally absent, when the feds were there the next morning. All right. They can just out and out lie, and no repercussions, apparently. They can get hit by a civil suit, but even if the civil suit is adjudicated against Fox and those other types, will it really hurt their bottom line? Is it just the cost of doing business? Here, I'll pay it, I guess, if I have to. Darn. Apparently, because since you got Kevin McCarthy handing over 41,000 hours, some ungodly amount, just here, have all of this. It's for transparency. You mean you're trying to keep it from having any transparency is what he means, giving it to a propaganda network. They continue to lie. They're stepping it up. Tucker Carlson was on last night, just lying. Everything that came out of his mouth about this train derailment was a lie. No repercussions. Tell the truth about American history, and that's a felony, and you will go to jail. If you complain about it, you will go to jail. If Andrea Mitchell has the smallest level of criticism, you're going to boycott them, aren't you, Ron DeSantis? As if you'd ever go on Andrea Mitchell's show to begin with, or anybody on MSNBC. Give me a break. Now they're trying to pass a law in Florida where you can sue a reporter or just basically anybody for defamation if you, well, call them a racist. That's defamation. Not the fact that the person being called a racist is a racist. But apparently being called a racist when you're a racist is defamatory. That's not how it works, Ron. You think those little white waiters without the white sheet is going to get you through to the rest of America to vote for you? I don't think so. No way. I know that they want to nullify the majority voters here in the United States of America because we're not white enough for them. So therefore, they don't have to respect anything about representative democracy. They don't have to respect anything about the security of those representatives in the House and the Senate. They can just give all of that to a Russia propaganda network so we can have one of those disaster films where, you know, White House Down or whatever it's called. I know it was North Koreans that came in, but I like the idea that Vlad, with his meager military ability, would, you know, try to take over the White House. Yep. Send in the Wagner Group. First place that guy goes is to the kitchen because he is Putin's chef, after all. Caterer. He was a caterer. So he knows about logistics. Okay, that's why he's running the Wagner Group. I like to call it Wagner, but it's Wagner. So old Tucker gets to slice and dice those tapes. You know what? James O'Keefe is available. He's out of a job right now. Maybe he's working with Tucker because he's got a lot of experience in that slicing and dicing. Working for the Russians. Is that hyperbole? Is that some sort of conspiracy theory? Maybe. But it's like immaterial, you know, the old adage that it, you know, doesn't matter whether you think you're a Nazi or not. The Nazis think you're a Nazi. So it doesn't really matter if Tucker Carlson, and I actually think he is, whether he is or is not a Russian propagandist. The Russian propagandists think he is. And they use it. And it's a little bit cute by half when the extreme MAGA elements in our representative democracy ape Russian Kremlin talking points within seconds and just put it on repeat over and over and over. Old Elon Musk is saturating my timeline with it. No more really neat photographs, color photographs of colorful umbrellas along the Mediterranean coastline. You know, like in Greece. None of those anymore. Nope. Constant Gosar, constant Biggs, constant Green, constant Berbert, constant Ronnie Jackson, constant. I think we're going to get one. We're going to get the Fox daughter, the Murdoch daughter, running Twitter. That's going to be the new CEO. Mark my words. All right. Well, enough rambling because that's about what we do anymore in this morning rant. It's always been a ramble, but it's been even more of a ramble lately, and I apologize for that. But hey, programming note for next week. My sister has a medical procedure that she has to go to, and it is quite early in the morning when she has to show up. And that's going to be this coming Tuesday. So I'll try to put a show together, but if not, we'll have something obviously in place before Hartman comes up after West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. So mark your calendars. I'll remind you once again, but this coming Tuesday, which would be the 28th. That's right. West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy will either be with a show that we recorded earlier for you or not. So anyway, that's that. And sometimes real life does intrude, and it is my sister after all. So that's what we're going to do. All right. Let us give you a rundown on what we have in store for you today in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene's national divorce would be disastrous for red states, and we all knew why before we were even reminded. On the rest of the menu, 3 Oklahoma Republican lawmakers called for a moratorium on the death penalty amid growing concern about the state's brisk pace of lethal injections. While in the midst of a Republican primary for U.S. Senate, the now former Arizona AG sat on records refuting election fraud. And the Alaska State House censored a GOP lawmaker over his incendiary child abuse comments. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the International Federation of Journalists has suspended the Russian Union of Journalists over its actions since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And Namibia welcomed Dr. Jill Biden to Africa. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link across the page, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio and possibly send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, it really does help us pay our bills and all the other costs that are incurred for running this powerhouse of resistance as we have been running it for the last 11-plus years, going on a dozen years. My. Anyway, your generosity over all these many years has sustained us and helped us quite a bit. So sustained and helped. And we've been paying those bills, and we've been flying under the radar, and it has been because of your generosity, and thank you for that. And once again, thank you to our recent Patreons. Your help really does help. Thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime, and you can get to that show notes and links diary by following me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable at Justice Putnam. Do it! You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts can be found, mixed in with all the rest of us. All right. Is that a humble brag? Probably. Our first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes, of course, from the Associated Press because, I don't know, they have a good selection and a good read, so we're doing it. All right. Sean Murphy from the AP brings us this first offering. 3 Oklahoma Republican lawmakers joined a former corrections official yesterday, Wednesday, to call for a moratorium on the death penalty amid growing concern about the state's brisk pace of lethal injections. Representative Kevin McDougal said he supports the death penalty, but believes Oklahoma's next death row inmate scheduled to die, Richard Glossip, is actually innocent. His case is what got me involved with this, and I could not stand to see an innocent man put to death in Oklahoma, and I happen to know that Oklahomans don't want to put an innocent man to death in Oklahoma either, said McDougal, a Republican from Broken Arrow. I bet there are a lot of Oklahomans who would like to see an innocent man put to death because they like it. But that's this reporter's opinion. Back to the article at hand. Glossip, who has long maintained his innocence, is scheduled to be executed on May 18th in the murder-for-hire killing of his former boss. But Oklahoma's new Attorney General, Getner Drummond, has ordered an independent review of his conviction. McDougal was joined at the press conference by 2 other Republican lawmakers and says many more of his GOP colleagues support his effort. Among those requesting a moratorium was Adam Luck, an appointee of Republican Governor Kevin Stitt to both the Board of Corrections that oversees the state prison system and the Pardon and Parole Board. Luck resigned last year after disagreements with Stitt over imposing the death penalty. Some clergy members also took part in the news conference. Oklahoma has executed more inmates per capita than any other state since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. Since that time, 10 death row inmates have walked free after being acquitted at a new trial or because prosecutors declined to refile charges that were dismissed by a court. Opposition to the death penalty, even among conservatives, is growing across the U.S., said Richard Dieter, director of the Washington, D.C.-based Death Penalty Information Center, a nonprofit that takes no position on capital punishment but has criticized the way states carry out executions. Conservatives have a platform for life, and life is on the line here in these cases, so it's not totally surprising, Dieter said. Public support and use of the death penalty in 2022 continued its more than 2-decade decline in the U.S., but support remains high in Oklahoma. A state ballot question in 2016 on whether to enshrine the death penalty in the Oklahoma Constitution received more than 65% of the vote. Jay Cooper of the AP brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Arizona's former Attorney General suppressed findings by his investigators who concluded There was no basis for allegations that the 2020 election was marred by widespread fraud, according to documents released yesterday by his successor. Democratic Attorney General Chris Mays, who took office last month, said the records show the 2020 election was conducted fairly and accurately by election officials. Previous Attorney General Mark Brnovich, a Republican, never released a March 2022 summary of the investigative findings, which ruled out most of the fraud claims spread by allies and supporters of Trump. Yet a month later, he released an interim report that claimed his investigation revealed serious vulnerabilities that must be addressed and raises questions about the 2020 election in Arizona. Oh, he Bill Barred it. He released his April report despite pushback from his investigators who said some of its claims were refuted by the probe. Brnovich was at the time in the midst of a Republican Party primary for U.S. Senate and facing fierce criticism from Trump, who claimed he wasn't doing enough to prosecute election fraud. Brnovich, whose primary bid was unsuccessful, also did not release a September memo that systematically refuted a bevy of election conspiracies that have taken root on the right, including allegations of dead or duplicate voters, pre-marked ballots flown in from Asia, election servers connected to the internet, and even manipulation by satellites controlled by the Italian military. In each instance, and in each matter, the aforementioned parties did not provide any evidence to support their allegations, a September memo read. The information that was provided was speculative in many instances, and when investigated by our agents and support staff, was found to be inaccurate. The September memo, which was among the documents released yesterday, Wednesday, describes an all-encompassing probe that became the top priority for the Attorney General's investigators, who spent more than 10,000 hours looking into 638 complaints. They opened 430 investigations and referred 22 cases for prosecution. President Joe Biden won Arizona by a little over 10,000 votes. Myers said the fraud claims were a waste. Or Mays said the fraud claims were a waste. The 10,000 plus hours spent diligently investigating every conspiracy theory under the sun distracted this office from its core mission of protecting the people of Arizona from real crime and fraud, Mays said in a statement. Attempts to reach Brnovich for comment were unsuccessful. Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. An Alaska lawmaker with a history of incendiary remarks was censured by the state house yesterday, Wednesday, after he said it has been argued that cases of fatal child abuse can be a cost savings because the child won't need related government services. The House voted 35-1 to censure Republican Representative David Eastman of Wasilla, with Eastman as the lone dissent. He was previously censored in 2017 over comments he made suggesting there are women in Alaska who try to get pregnant just to get a free trip to the city for abortions. During a committee hearing on Monday on adverse childhood experiences, Eastman asked the testifier how he would respond, quote, to the argument that I have heard on occasion where, in the case where the child abuse is fatal, obviously it's not good for the child, but it's actually a benefit to society because there is not a need for government services that child would otherwise be entitled to if they had lived. The testifier, Trevor Storrs, president and CEO of the Alaska Children's Trust, asked Eastman to repeat what he'd said. Did you say a benefit for society? Taking dollars, Eastman said, referencing a figure in a document provided to the committee that was related to costs associated with neglect and abuse. Eastman said it gets argued periodically that it's actually a cost savings because that child is not going to need any of those government services that they might otherwise be entitled to receive or need based on growing up in this type of environment. I think where he really hears most of that argument is at the end of the bar. Back to the article. Storrs called the loss of a child immeasurable. Representative Andrew Gray, an Anchorage Democrat who brought the censure motion, said Eastman should be censured for offensive, insulting, and unsubstantiated statements that undermine the dignity of the House. Gray said he was also speaking as a parent. Eastman say Gray impugned his motives and character and labeled as outrageous and unacceptable any suggestion that he or members of his district support child abuse when I've staked my entire political career arguing for the opposite. Really? The House is controlled by a Republican-led majority. The predominantly Democratic minority also includes independents and a Republican. Eastman is not part of either caucus. He has at times butted heads with Republicans, even being removed late last session from the then Republican minority caucus and from 2 committees. He last year easily won re-election in his district and withstood a challenge to his eligibility to serve in the legislature over his ties to the far-right group Oath Keepers. Well, I guess it says it all, doesn't it? Well, that also says let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Clara Moskowitz, and you're listening to the Science Quickly podcast from Scientific American. Today we're talking about life as we don't know it. Sarah Scholes just wrote a piece for us in our February magazine on that very subject. Sarah, hi.
Hi, Clara. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So what exactly is life as we don't know it? Or, as you brilliantly call it in the story, Laudaki.
Yes, I'm glad we like the acronym that I just made up. But I think to talk about life as we don't know it, it's important first to talk about life as we do know it, because we really only think about life as life, biology as biology. But life as we do know it is really just a specific instance of one kind of biology that could exist, where most things kind of breathe oxygen, rely on DNA and RNA as genetic material and kind of share a common, what scientists call biochemistry. And so that is life as we know it. And life as we don't know it, I guess I'm procrastinating saying what it is, because the point is that we don't know what it is. It is something that is biological, but does not necessarily rely on the same elements and compounds or ways of transferring information. It's just something it's not physics or chemistry, but it's biology, but we don't know anything about it really.
Right. It actually kind of hurts your brain to try to imagine something that you've never encountered or never thought about or never seen before. So as we talk about looking out into the universe for life, are most searches for extraterrestrial life these days searches for life as we know it or life as we don't know it?
Right now and historically, most searches have been for life as we do know it, because it's the only example of life that we have. So it kind of makes sense as a place to start. One analogy that the scientists I talk to use is, if you lose your keys out of the street somewhere, the first place you might look is under a street lamp, because there's light there. You'll be able to see it. You'll be able to recognize it as keys. But if you're just fumbling around in the dark, even if your keys are there, it's a lot harder. And so it makes sense to me scientifically that is where scientists would start. And so they look for things like essentially fingerprints out in the universe that life kind of like us or like other animals on Earth might create if we saw them somewhere else. But now that we've been kind of doing that for a little while, scientists are starting to get a little more creative and think about ways that you might try to find life as we don't know it, which is very hard because, as you said, we don't know anything about it. It's unfamiliar and unimaginable, I think, is what one of the scientists said to me. And where do you even begin with that?
Right, totally. So what are some of their ideas? How do they go about looking for life as we don't know it?
Right, good question. And they have given it a lot of thought. The general idea is to figure out what fundamentally makes something that's alive different from something that is just relying on like physics or chemistry. Like what fundamentally makes something biological, and how would you look for a signature of that? And some of the things that they have come up with so far are looking for compounds, molecular compounds that are complex, that nature would be unlikely to just produce on its own unless something alive was kind of forcing it to. Another thing is looking for maybe concentrations of molecules like that, like little dots of complication on another planet or on a moon of a planet in the solar system or something. A third thing is evidence that energy is kind of flowing from one place to another. Like things in nature generally like to be in equilibrium. So if you see something that's not in equilibrium, where energy is kind of flowing in and being used, that could be an indication of life. But these are also essentially just guesses. They don't really know. It's kind of another sort of street lamp.
Huh. It's cool to think about, though. So you touch on an important point, though. What is life anyway? How do you define being alive?
Everyone would like to know the answer to that question. And in general, scientists don't totally agree on the definition of life and what makes something alive. There are dozens of different definitions that are kind of equally and differently valid. But there was one scientist who wrote a paper kind of bringing together all those different definitions and trying to distill them down into the essence of what it means to be alive. And at least in his opinion, when you get right down to it, it's just life is self-reproduction with variation. So essentially something that can make more copies of itself, but copies that aren't just clones, but that are a little different. That's it, I guess. Although you could probably ask 5 different scientists and get 5 different definitions.
That certainly works to describe my 3-year-old and my 5-year-old.
Not clones of you exactly?
Not even close. So do you personally think that some form of extraterrestrial life must be out there somewhere?
For most of my life, I have thought that there's just got to be something out there. The universe is so big. We know now that there are so many planets with so many different conditions, a lot of which, could be habitable to life like us. And so kind of in the past, I just thought like, yeah, statistically, sure, of course, there has to be life out there. But as I've learned more and worked on articles like this and talked to people who are biologists and not just astronomers, they're a little more hesitant. Life arose here from physics and chemistry, became biology, and we don't actually know how that happened. And so we don't know how hard it is. We don't know how likely it is. And so even if there's trillions of planets in the universe, we don't actually know that the chances of life arising are more than, 1 in 10 trillion or something like that. So my new stance is that I don't know, and I'm not making any guesses. I'm going to wait for people like these researchers to gather some more data and then reform my conclusion. What do you think?
That sounds very wise and prudent. I still hear the echoes of Jodie Foster's character in Contact saying, if there isn't someone out there, it's just an awful waste of space. So I hope so. I feel like I'm hopeful for life. But as you point out, it's fascinating either way. I mean, if we were the only example, that would just be incredible. But thinking about what life out there might actually look like also feels incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, I think either answer is really pretty awe-inspiring. I would kind of prefer to have some alien cousins, but if they're not out there, I can kind of get on board with being alone in the universe also.
Agreed. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Sarah, and for writing the awesome article. So I encourage everybody to go read that for a lot more interesting details.
Thank you.
For Scientific American's Science Quickly, I'm Clara Moskowitz. Science Quickly is produced by Kelso Harper, Tulika Bose, and Jeff Delvicio. Our theme music was composed by Dominic Smith. Don't forget to subscribe to Science Quickly. For more in-depth science news, features, podcasts, and videos, head to scientificamerican.com.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Change the Pledge of Allegiance? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The original pledge, written by Socialist Minister Ralph Bellamy in 1892, was, I pledge allegiance to my flag, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In the 1920s, the words, the flag of the United States of America, were substituted for my flag, a minor tinker. Then, in 1954, at President Eisenhower's urging, in order to combat godless communism, Congress inserted the words, under God, into the pledge. One nation, under God, not a minor tinker. In the early 2000s, the majority of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the words under God were unconstitutional, just as the words under Zeus, or under no God, or under Jesus would have been. However, in 2004, the Supreme Court preserved under God in the pledge by ruling that the father who had brought the case for his elementary school daughter lacked legal standing because the student's mother got sole legal custody in the divorce. The issue of under God in the pledge has not been back to the Supreme Court since. Alfred T. Goodwin, the federal judge who wrote the appeals court opinion that ruled the pledge unconstitutional, died last December 27th at the age of 99. Judge Goodwin will be remembered as a jurist who stood up for principle. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith.
and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1942. That was the day that 27 Japanese women working in the Seattle public school system handed in their forced resignations. In the aftermath of the attacks on Pearl Harbor, anti-Japanese hysteria swept the United States, especially the West Coast. 127,000 people of Japanese ancestry were sent to live in 10 internment camps by executive order of President Roosevelt. Many of these U.S. citizens sold their homes and businesses, often for a fraction of their value, before they were forced to move. In Seattle, mothers from Gatewood Elementary School circulated a petition for the removal of Japanese office employees from the schools. The school district pressured the women to resign. Even James Sakamoto, the editor of the Japanese American Courier, encouraged the women to voluntarily leave their jobs. He met with the women at the newspaper's office and told them they should resign before they were fired. Faced with such pressure, the women wrote a resignation letter. They wrote, "Most of us have received our education in local schools and have been proud of the fact, as we have been proud of our positions as employees." Word of the resignations quickly became headline news in local newspapers. Several protests were held in support of the women. Students at the University of Washington circulated a petition on their behalf. They gathered more than 1,000 signatures, declaring the treatment of these office workers undemocratic, intolerant, disrespectful of the rights of American citizens. In 1986, the governor of Washington signed into law an admission of wrongdoing toward these women and payment of reparations for their forced resignations. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. We always begin, whether from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 26 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy conditions, and we remain under a winter storm warning. And temperatures will be cooler today, expecting highs of only in the low to mid 30s. And snow showers throughout the day, winds light and variable, scattered snow showers tonight, and then partly to mostly cloudy later on overnight, with lows in the low 20s, winds light and variable. And then a few clouds early tomorrow, otherwise mostly sunny, with highs spiking around 50. And then winds will be out of the northeast at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And it looks like we'll have another sunny day, though not so warm, around 48 to 50. And then cool, freezing overnight lows. And then quite a bit of snow expected again on Sunday and through most of next week. Pollen still is rated none here in the little village of Rogue River, Oregon. The air quality index for the region is good at 44 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.68 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles, and relative humidity is at 99%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 46 degrees with light rain. Paris is 50 degrees and cloudy. Rome is 60 degrees and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 28 and fair. Kabul is 41 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 64 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 46 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 68 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 41 degrees and mostly cloudy. And New York is 40 degrees Fahrenheit with foggy conditions. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. The International Federation of Journalists has suspended with immediate effect the Russian Union of Journalists over its actions since Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its role in annexed Ukrainian territories. The IFJ, which represents more than 600,000 media workers across the world, said the Russian Union's membership was suspended following an investigation, then a vote by its Global Executive Committee yesterday, Wednesday. The vote was held after the union refused to reconsider its decision to set up branches in 4 regions annexed by Russia, the Federation said. The Russian Union of Journalists' actions in establishing 4 branches in the annexed Ukrainian territories have clearly shattered solidarity and sown divisions among sister unions, said IFJ President Dominique Prodali. The Kremlin in September illegally annexed the Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhzhia regions, where it claims its rule is welcomed. Pro-Moscow separatists have controlled part of Donetsk and neighboring Luhansk province since 2014. The IFJ said it will continue to support independent journalists inside and outside Russia while providing aid to its Ukrainian affiliates. According to the Federation, Ukraine was the deadliest country for journalists in 2022, with 12 media workers killed while doing their work.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Darlene Superville of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Dancers, drummers, and Namibia's President and First Lady welcomed U.S. First Lady Jill Biden yesterday, Wednesday, as she opened a 5-day, 2-country visit to Africa aimed at highlighting the challenges facing women and young people and the food insecurity plaguing the Horn of Africa. After flying all night, the First Lady was feted at the airport by members of some of Namibia's ethnic groups, clad in red, white, and blue or bright pink, who greeted her with singing, dancing, drumming, and ululating. The last high-level U.S. official to visit was Vice President Al Gore. in 1996. The First Lady's trip is part of a commitment by President Joe Biden to deepen U.S. engagement with the fast-growing region. The United States has fallen well behind China in investment in sub-Saharan Africa, which has become a key battleground in an increasingly fraught competition between the major powers. Jill Biden and Monica Ganyos, Namibia's First Lady, embraced on the tarmac before Biden greeted U.S. and Namibian diplomatic and government officials. The two first met in December when dozens of African leaders flew to Washington for a summit hosted by President Biden. It is Jill Biden's sixth time to Africa, but her first trip as First Lady. She is following the footsteps of her recent predecessors who all made the trip across the Atlantic Ocean in the name of trying to help foster goodwill toward the United States. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.